Corin, a proud Zethari warrior, stared at the vast emerald landscape of Vokar, the planet he had once thought of as a sanctuary. The air here, thick with the scent of blooming trees and fresh soil, was now tinged with unease. He had traveled far and wide across the galaxy, seeking a place to leave his hatchlings, young ones who were rare among his kind. Albino Zethari were considered sacred, their pale, almost translucent skin marking them as the offspring of a long and noble lineage. The Zethari race had fought for centuries to survive, and these young ones were their future. Corin had made the decision to leave them here, thinking they would be safe in the untouched wilderness of Vokar. For weeks, his thoughts had drifted back to them, the tiny voices of his hatchlings calling out in his dreams. He had set his mind to their safety, but that was before the unthinkable happened. They were gone, without warning, without a trace. The small colony of Vokar's wildlife seemed to whisper in the breeze, but no one had seen his hatchlings. The forest, though teeming with life, held only silence when he searched. Corin's gaze darkened as he surveyed the ground. He had already spent days combing through the thick underbrush, seeking any sign, any clue that would guide him toward his missing children. He could hear nothing but the rustling of distant leaves and the occasional chirping of unseen creatures. His heart raced as his mind raced, running through every possibility. They couldn't have just disappeared. He knew this planet. He had left them in the safest place possible. He had been so sure. As a warrior, Corin was trained to trust his instincts, but today his instincts seemed to be failing him. He moved deeper into the dense jungle of Vokar, where the towering trees blocked most of the sun's rays. The path had become difficult to navigate, the thick vines and underbrush hindering his every step. But then, something caught his eye. A flash of movement, a disturbance in the foliage. His mind snapped into alertness as he moved toward it, silent as a shadow. He stopped just short of the clearing, his eyes narrowing at the sight before him. It was a wreck. A ship, once sleek and shining, now a twisted mass of metal and scorched remnants, lay half buried in the undergrowth. Corin approached cautiously, his mind racing with questions. The craft was unlike any Zethari ship he had seen before, its structure far too primitive. His heart skipped a beat. It was a human vessel.
You may.
They had begun exploring this corner of the galaxy recently, but Corin never expected them to come this far. Their ships were often erratic, and their people, despite their curiosity, were unpredictable. He had hoped that the humans would remain distant from his people's ancient secrets. His suspicions grew with every step. There was no sign of his hatchlings here, but the wreckage told a story. Someone had been here. The ship had clearly been destroyed, but it wasn't the destruction that concerned him. It was the faint traces of something else. A piece of fabric, a bright human-made material fluttered from a nearby branch. The fabric seemed oddly out of place here. He knew his hatchlings would never have left this item behind. They had been too small to travel alone. Someone had taken them. Someone had taken his children. His heart clenched at the thought. The hatchlings, so young, so fragile. How could they survive in this harsh, unfamiliar world without protection? A new sense of urgency gripped him. He had to find them. As he combed through the wreckage for any more clues, Corin's gaze shifted to the ground. There, beneath a pile of charred metal, lay a small, crushed communicator. The symbols etched into its surface were unmistakable. Human. The device had been used recently. The soft hum of energy within it was the final piece of the puzzle. Humans had been here. And they had taken his hatchlings. The warrior's fists clenched as he stood up, his mind spinning with the implications. The hatchlings were alive. They had to be. But where were they now? Who had taken them? And why? Corin knew that he couldn't do this alone. He needed help. He wasn't far from a settlement, a small, temporary human base. He'd seen their landing crafts just beyond the forest when he arrived. their encampment visible through the trees. But if the humans had his hatchlings, he would need to be cautious. These were not the same humans who had been in peaceful negotiations with his people. These were explorers, curious and unafraid of the unknown. Corin steeled himself as he made his way to the settlement, his muscles tensed with every step. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the sounds of distant voices. He paused, listening intently. A single voice, calm and clear, reached his ears. It was speaking in the human language. But what struck Corin was the tone. The words were soft, soothing, not the harsh, commanding tone of the Terran soldiers he had encountered in the past. No, this voice was caring. He moved closer, his thoughts racing. Who was this? A human, surely. But why was she speaking to his hatchlings so gently? What was going on? Peering through the thick branches, Corin saw her, a young human girl, no older than 18, with messy brown hair that fell over her face. She was kneeling by a small fire surrounded by his hatchlings. They were nestled comfortably in her lap, cooing and wriggling, their tiny limbs grasping at the air in innocent curiosity. She fed them carefully, as though they were the most precious beings in the galaxy. Her eyes were filled with tenderness as she whispered words Corin couldn't quite understand. She was caring for his children. Corin watched her for several moments, his emotions conflicting. Fear, anger, confusion. His mind raced, unsure of what to make of this unexpected situation. Why had the girl taken them? How had she found them? He had no answers, only questions. The hatchlings, once lost to him, were safe for now, but not with him. His chest tightened as he stepped back, out of sight, contemplating his next move. He could approach her, demand answers. But what if she didn't know? What if she had been protecting them, without understanding the consequences of her actions? He couldn't risk her harm, but neither could he leave his children in the hands of a stranger. He had no choice. He would confront her. Corin took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This human girl was the key. The hatchlings had found refuge with her. But for what reason? What connection did she have with them? He didn't know, but he would find out. And then he would take his children back. With his mind made up, Corin stepped out of the shadows, moving toward her. The soft rustle of his movement caught her attention. She froze, her gaze locking with his. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't scream. She didn't run. Instead, she slowly stood, her hands gently resting on the hatchlings. Corin's voice, though deep and powerful, softened. "I know what you've done." The girl's eyes flickered between him and the hatchlings. There was no anger in her expression, only confusion. Where are my children?" Corin interrupted, his voice steady but laced with urgency.
Tell me now.
She hesitated but didn't back down.
They're safe, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They've been with me since they were left behind. Corin studied her face, searching for any signs of deception, but there was none.
She spoke with sincerity. He could see it in her eyes. But this situation, this unknown, threatened everything he had fought for. And Corin knew one thing for certain. He couldn't leave without his hatchlings. The silence between Corin and the young human girl stretched on, heavy and filled with unspoken questions. Corin's eyes narrowed as he studied her carefully. She wasn't harmed. She wasn't threatening. She simply stood there, her hands gently cradling the small albino Zethary hatchlings. And yet, Corin's heart was filled with suspicion. How had this girl, a human, come to be so intertwined with his people's future? And why hadn't she left the planet like the rest of her kind? The girl, sensing his gaze, shifted slightly, her stance hesitant but firm. She wasn't afraid. But Corin could see that she knew something important. But what? Why had she taken in the hatchlings, cared for them, and kept them safe when every instinct told him to be wary of her? Humans were unpredictable, dangerous even, and Corin had seen firsthand the harm they could cause. But there was something different about her, something that made him stop, if only for a moment, and question his judgment. "I'm not going to hurt you," the girl said, her voice soft but her words clear. Her eyes flickered toward the hatchlings, still curled peacefully in her arms, as if she were seeking their approval. Corin wasn't sure whether to believe her or not. His instinct told him to stay on guard. But the girl's words had a sincerity that made him pause. It wasn't often that a human would speak in such a way. Most would have fled, or worse, tried to defend themselves against him. But she didn't. She simply stood there, her hands cradling the young ones with care. "How did you find them?" Corin asked, his voice gruff but calm. He wasn't sure if he was asking for answers or merely testing her. But there was no time to waste. He needed to understand this, to make sense of it all. The girl took a deep breath and slowly sat down, the hatchlings still in her lap. "I didn't find them. Not exactly," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I heard them first. The sound they made, it was different from anything I'd ever heard before. At first I thought I was just imagining things, but then, one day, I found them hidden in the trees, weak and scared. They were lost, and I couldn't just leave them. I had to help them." Corin didn't move, but his mind raced. The hatchlings, frightened and weak. They had been alone, abandoned by the world they had been brought into, and yet this human girl had taken them in, cared for them. It didn't make sense. What had she seen in them that made her act with such compassion? The girl continued. "I know they're not like the others. They're special, aren't they? I could feel it. And when I saw them, I knew they needed me." She paused, looking directly at Corin. "I don't know why I felt that way. Maybe it's because I've been alone so long, I don't know. But I couldn't just let them suffer."
Her words hit Corin harder than he expected.
For a moment, his guard dropped, and he allowed himself to feel the weight of what she was saying. The hatchlings were his responsibility, his kin, his future. And yet, here was a human girl, offering them something he couldn't, compassion and care in a way only someone truly without fear could. He didn't understand it, but there was no denying the truth. She had protected them. Corin's hands tightened at his sides and his mind flicked between two paths. One was to take the hatchlings and leave, to remove them from this human and return to his people. They would be safer with him, safer from whatever human motives lingered in the back of this girl's mind. The other path was less clear, less predictable. It involved staying here, talking with her, and learning more. Understanding why, after all these years of war and distrust, this girl had chosen to protect his people's future. The choice wasn't easy, but before he could make a decision, the hatchlings stirred in her lap, their small limbs stretching out as they reached for Corin. Their soft, high-pitched sounds filled the air, and Corin's chest tightened. They were his, but they were so small, so fragile. His protective instincts flared once more, and he moved a step forward without thinking, but the girl's voice stopped him. "Don't take them from me," she said, her tone quiet but firm.
Corin froze. "I don't want to take them from you," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his words.
"But they are not yours to keep." The girl's eyes met his. "I know," she said, her voice softening, "but they're not yours to lose either. I won't let you harm them." Corin's gaze softened just slightly, though his stance remained unyielding.
"I will take them," he said, his tone more like an order than a request. "I have no choice."
The girl stood up slowly, keeping the hatchlings in her arms.
"I won't stop you."
"But I'll make sure they're safe. I'll do whatever it takes to protect them." Corin's heart raced at her words. This girl, this human, had made a promise he didn't understand. Her resolve was clear, but it confused him. Why would she care so much for creatures she had no connection to? Why was she so willing to go against everything she knew? He took another step forward, his mind still torn, but something stopped him. A deep, strange feeling tugging at his chest. He couldn't explain it. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hatred. It was something new, something unexpected. A feeling that this girl might be more important than he had first realized. The hatchlings, sensing his movement, gave a small, joyful squeal, reaching out to him again. One of them, the smallest, managed to wriggle free from the girl's arms and slowly crawled toward Corin. The sight was enough to soften even his hardened heart. The girl, noticing the hatchling's actions, stepped back. "I think they want to be with you," she said quietly. "I don't know how, but I feel like they know you." "And they trust you?" Corin's mind reeled. He had never felt anything like this before. It was the way the hatchling looked at him, with a mixture of curiosity and longing, that made him stop. It was as if it knew him, as if it had always known him. He bent down slowly, extending his hand, and the hatchling crawled into it eagerly. The moment their skin touched, something inside Corin shifted. It was a connection, a bond that ran deeper than he could comprehend. The hatchling chirped softly, nuzzling against his palm as if it had always been there, as if it had always been his to protect. Corin's chest tightened. The hatchlings, once lost and abandoned, were here. They were safe. And now, they were with him again. The girl watched, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what this means," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "but I'll help you keep them safe. But if you want to take them, I won't stand in your way. But please, don't hurt them." Corin straightened, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come to this planet searching for his hatchlings, determined to bring them back. But what he hadn't expected was this: the possibility of an alliance, the possibility of trust where there had been none before. He met the girl's gaze, his voice low and steady. "You have done something no one else would have. You've protected them, even when it wasn't your responsibility. But that doesn't change the fact that they are mine. They belong to the Scifi." The girl nodded slowly, as if understanding the weight of his words. "I understand. But I don't think I can just let you take them without understanding why. Why are they so important to you?" Corin hesitated, his gaze flickering down at the hatchlings in his hands. "Because they are the future of my people, the future of everything we've fought for. I will do whatever it takes to ensure they survive." The girl didn't say anything for a moment, but her gaze softened.
"I see," she said quietly. "Then I'll help you." For a brief moment, there was silence.
The tension between them was thick, but Corin could feel a shift. Something that made him believe, just for a second, that this human girl wasn't his enemy. She might even become an ally. He didn't know how it would end, but for the first time since he'd arrived on Vokar, Corin allowed himself to hope. The days that followed were filled with silence and uncertainty. Corin's thoughts were constantly occupied with the hatchlings and the girl, Arya, who had become so unexpectedly entwined in their fate. He had initially come to Vokar with one goal in mind: to find his missing hatchlings and take them back to their people. But as the days passed, it became clear that the situation was not as simple as he had imagined. The bond between Arya and the hatchlings was undeniable, and despite his initial suspicions, Corin found himself unable to separate them from her care. The hatchlings, small and fragile, had grown stronger with each passing day. Their once weak limbs were now more agile, and their bright, curious eyes followed every movement Corin made. They seemed to trust him, and that trust only deepened the conflict in his heart. He had come to take them back, but it felt like taking them away from something they had come to know as safe. Arya had been their protector, their caretaker. She had given them warmth, food, and protection when they needed it most. Corin spent his days watching them, observing the way they responded to Arya. They would giggle softly as she fed them, their tiny hands reaching for her with instinctive affection. The sight of the hatchlings in such a peaceful state stirred something deep within him. He knew what the hatchlings meant to his people, but he also knew that the future of the Zethari depended on more than just the survival of the young ones. The balance of the galaxy, the survival of his entire species, rested on them. And yet, there was Arya, a human girl who had no reason to care for the Zethari hatchlings. She could have left them, abandoned them, or worse, turned them over to others who might exploit them. But she hadn't. Instead, she had chosen to protect them, to treat them as if they were her own children. Corin's mind raced as he paced in the small clearing near their camp. The fire crackled softly, and the hatchling slept peacefully beside Arya. He couldn't deny that something had changed in him since meeting her. There was a part of him that wanted to simply take the hatchlings and leave, to return to his people and fulfill his mission. But there was another part of him that felt a strange sense of guilt. He wasn't just taking them away from Arya. He was taking them away from the only home they had known since they had arrived on this planet. Arya had been watching him from across the fire, her eyes soft but filled with curiosity. "You're troubled," she said, her voice gentle. "I can see it in your eyes." Corin stopped pacing and turned to face her, his brow furrowed in thought.
"I'm not sure what to do," he admitted. "I came here to take them back to my people."
But he hesitated, searching for the right words. "But they've become attached to you."
"They trust you." Arya smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the soft fur of one of the hatchlings. "They trust you too."
I can see it. They know you're their protector, even if you haven't realized it yet.
Corin's heart skipped a beat. He had always been a warrior, a protector of his people. But this was different. The hatchlings, so small and vulnerable, had placed their trust in him without hesitation, and for some reason, Arya had done the same. She had chosen to protect them, even though it was a choice that came with its own set of risks. The humans were not always kind to the Zethari, and Arya had risked her life to care for them. In a world where survival was often about strength and power, her actions had shown him something he had never considered before, that sometimes compassion was just as powerful. He sat down across from her, his gaze still focused on the hatchlings.
"They're not just young ones.
They are the future of my people. Survival means everything to us."
Arya nodded, her expression serious.
"I understand, but they're more than just symbols of your people's future. They're living beings, with hearts and minds of their own. You can't just take them away without understanding what that means for them." Corin looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had spent his entire life fighting, protecting, and planning for the future of the Zethari. But in that moment, he realized that he had never truly stopped to think about what the hatchlings wanted. What did they need? Were they ready to leave the safety of this place, the only home they had known since their arrival? And if he took them, what would they be left with? He had never questioned his mission before. He had always followed orders, knowing that the survival of his people was at stake. But now, as he looked at the hatchlings, he wondered if he had been so focused on the bigger picture that he had overlooked the most important thing, the bond between them and the girl who had cared for them.
Corin's voice was low, almost a whisper as he spoke.
"I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can take them away from you." Arya met his gaze, her eyes filled with understanding.
But you have to understand that whatever you decide, you can't do it alone.
They're not just your responsibility.
They're part of a much bigger story now, one that involves more than just your people and mine.
Corin's mind spun.
She was right. The hatchlings were part of something bigger than either of them had realized. They were a link between two worlds, two species that had once been at odds, but were now forced to confront a shared fate. The future of the Zethari was tied to these hatchlings, but so was the future of humans. If the hatchlings were to survive, they needed more than just protection. They needed understanding, compassion, and the willingness to see the bigger picture.
I came here to protect them,
Corin said, his voice barely a whisper.
but now I realize that they are more than just a mission.
They are part of something that goes beyond all of us.
Arya reached out and gently touched his arm. I understand.
And I'll do whatever it takes to help them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire flickered between them, casting long shadows in the night. The hatchlings stirred in their sleep, their soft murmurs filling the quiet. Corin felt a sense of calm wash over him, as if something inside him had shifted. He had come to this planet with a mission, but now he saw that the path ahead wasn't as clear as he had thought. It wasn't just about protecting the hatchlings, it was about understanding what they needed, what they wanted, and how they could survive in a world that was changing faster than either of them could understand. In the days that followed, Corin and Arya continued to care for the hatchlings together. They worked as a team, sharing the responsibility of protecting them. As the days turned into weeks, Corin began to see the hatchlings in a new light. They weren't just symbols of his people's future. They were children, with hopes and fears, with dreams and desires. They were alive, and they needed love and care just as much as they needed protection. But even as the hatchlings grew stronger, Corin knew that the time would come when he would have to make a choice. He couldn't stay on this planet forever. The Xthri needed him, and the hatchlings needed to return to their people. But what would that mean for Arya? What would it mean for the bond they had formed? Corin wasn't sure. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't alone in his decisions, and that, he realized, was the most important thing of all. The days seemed to stretch on endlessly, each one blending into the next as Corin and Arya continued their delicate balance of caring for the hatchlings. Corin had never expected to find himself in such a situation. He had been raised to be a warrior, to protect his people at all costs. But now, as he watched the hatchlings grow stronger, their trust in him and Arya evident in every soft chirp and reaching hand, he found himself questioning everything he had known. The hatchlings, once fragile and small, were becoming more alert. Their eyes, once dull and uncertain, now sparkled with curiosity and wonder. They had come a long way since that first day Arya had found them in the woods, abandoned and alone. It was as if the world was opening up to them, and they were eager to explore it. But Corin knew the reality of their situation. They were still young, and the galaxy was a dangerous place. He couldn't stay on this planet forever. He couldn't leave them here, unprotected. Yet, every time he thought about leaving, something in him resisted. The bond between him and the hatchlings had grown stronger with each passing day. And it wasn't just the bond with the hatchlings, it was the connection he had begun to form with Arya. Arya was unlike any human he had ever encountered. She was kind, resourceful, and unafraid of the unknown. She had taken in the hatchlings without hesitation, caring for them with the love of a mother. It was something Corin had never expected, and as much as he hated to admit it, he found himself beginning to trust her. The fire crackled between them as they sat in silence, the hatchlings curled up beside Arya, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath. Corin glanced at Arya, noticing the way she looked at the hatchlings with such tenderness. It was clear that she had become attached to them, just as he had, and for a moment he wondered if he could take them from her, knowing how much she cared for them. "You've done so much for them," Corin said, his voice low. "I didn't expect you to care for them like this." Arya looked up at him, her expression soft but filled with determination. "They needed me, and I couldn't just turn my back on them." She paused, glancing down at the hatchlings. "I don't know why, but I feel like they're meant to be here. I can't explain it, but I know that I'm supposed to protect them." Corin nodded, his heart heavy. He understood what she meant, more than she knew. The hatchlings had become a part of him in ways he hadn't anticipated, and now he couldn't imagine leaving them behind. But the truth was, He couldn't stay here forever. His mission was clear. The Zethari needed the hatchlings. They were the future of his people, the key to their survival. He couldn't abandon that responsibility, but as the days passed, he began to realize that the future he had always fought for might not be the same as the future that lay ahead. The galaxy was changing. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to start thinking about a new kind of future. The wind rustled through the trees, and the quiet of the evening settled around them. The hatchlings stirred, their tiny forms wriggling in their sleep. Arya reached down and gently stroked one of them, her hand tender and reassuring. Corin watched the scene with a strange mix of awe and sadness. He had never imagined that something so fragile, so small, could have such an impact on him. As the fire flickered, the sky above them began to darken, the stars slowly emerging one by one. Corin felt the weight of the moment settle over him. The decision he had been putting off was no longer something he could ignore. The hatchlings were growing, and their future was uncertain. They needed to return to the Zethari homeworld, to be raised among their own kind. Corin stood up slowly, his mind made up. "We can't stay here forever, Arya," he said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of his words. "The hatchlings need to go home. I need to take them back." Arya looked up at him, her expression soft but resolute.
"I know," she said quietly. "I've known this day would come."
"But I'm not ready to say goodbye to them. They've become a part of my life." Corin felt a pang of guilt, but he knew there was no other choice. "I don't want to take them from you, but they need to be with their people."
"They can't stay here. It's not safe for them."
Arya nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on the hatchlings. "I understand, but I'll never forget them. They've changed me in ways I can't explain." Corin stood there for a moment, his heart heavy. He had never imagined that this day would come, that he would have to say goodbye to the hatchlings. But as much as it hurt, he knew it was the right thing to do. The future of his people depended on them, and he couldn't let them stay here, isolated and unprotected. The next few days were filled with a quiet sadness. Corin and Arya prepared for the journey ahead, the hatchlings growing stronger with each passing day. But the bond between them and Arya was undeniable. They had become a family, in their own way. And saying goodbye wasn't easy. On the day they were set to leave, Corin stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the sun rise over the horizon. The hatchlings were bundled in his arms, their small faces peaceful as they slept. Arya stood beside him, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "I wish things were different," she said softly. "But I know this is what you have to do." Corin nodded, his throat tight.
"I never imagined I'd leave with a part of me missing."
Arya placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch comforting. "You won't be alone."
"They'll always be a part of you, and I'll always be here if you need me."
Corin looked at her, his heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Arya."
"For everything." She smiled faintly, but her eyes were filled with emotion. "Take care of them. They're special." Corin didn't speak, but his heart ached as he turned away, the hatchlings cradled carefully in his arms. He took one last look at the planet, at the girl who had cared for them as if they were her own. And then he stepped forward, knowing that the future was waiting for him, for the hatchlings and for the Zethari people. As he and the hatchlings made their way to the ship that would take them home, Corin couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers, but there was something new in his heart, a sense of purpose beyond duty, beyond survival. The hatchlings had changed everything, and for the first time in his life, Corin felt like he was truly part of something bigger. The future was still uncertain, but it was no longer just about survival. It was about connection, compassion, and the willingness to see the world in a different light. And as he looked down at the hatchlings in his arms, Corin knew that the journey ahead would be one worth taking.